It started as a joke, her telling me to behave, me daring her to do the same. But behind that playful smile was a tension neither of us expected, and it changed everything. I hadn't been to my friend's house in months, and walking up the familiar driveway felt strangely different this time. Maybe it was the evening light, soft and golden, spilling through the living room curtains. Or maybe it was the quiet hum of something I couldn't name. When the door opened, it wasn't my friend who greeted me. It was her. She leaned casually against the frame, one hand resting on the wood, the other holding a mug of tea. My friend's stepmom. I'd seen her before, of course, but never like this, not standing here, framed in warm lamplight, her hair gently falling over her shoulders, her presence filling the space before a word was spoken. "Behave yourself," she said, her voice even but playful, a knowing smile tugging at her lips. The words caught me off guard. They weren't stern, not really. They carried a tease, as though she already knew I wouldn't. I smirked before I could stop myself. "Only if you do first." Her eyebrows lifted, amused. For a moment, we just looked at each other, her gaze steady, mine pretending to be. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable but alive, as though we were both aware that something small had shifted between us in that instant. She stepped back, allowing me inside. The house smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon, the kind of scent that makes you feel at home even if you don't live there. My footsteps softened against the rug as I followed her into the living room. "Your friend's upstairs," she said, setting her mug down on the side table. Her voice carried that calm confidence, but her eyes flickered over me once more, like she was trying to read whether my reply earlier had been a joke or something more. I sat down on the couch, pretending to be casual, though my heart still felt the echo of that doorway exchange. She moved gracefully around the room, picking up a folded blanket, adjusting a cushion, small, ordinary motions, yet I couldn't ignore how aware I was of her presence. She had a kind of elegance that didn't need effort. Every tilt of her head, every light movement seemed intentional, yet natural. My friend had always called her strict, but in this moment she felt more human, more layered. When she returned to her tea, she caught me glancing. Instead of calling me out, she just gave a small, knowing smile, the kind that makes you feel seen, maybe even understood, without a single word. I cleared my throat, trying to shake the weight of that silence. "So, do I get in trouble if I don't behave?" Her lips curved again, faintly. "We'll see." The reply was simple, but it stayed with me. Longer than it should have. By the time my friend finally came down the stairs, joking and pulling me toward his room, I already knew this visit would be different. Something about her words, her smile, the way the air had shifted when we first locked eyes, it had left a mark. And it all began with one playful warning at the door. The next few hours moved the way they always did when I came over. My friend pulling me into a video game, the sound of controllers clicking, laughter bouncing between us. But even in that familiar rhythm, I found myself distracted. It wasn't intentional. My eyes just seemed to find her without meaning to. She was in the kitchen, not far from where we sat. The low light from the hanging lamp caught strands of her hair as she leaned over the counter, jotting something down in a notebook. Every so often she tucked a loose piece of hair behind her ear, and I noticed how graceful the movement was, not practiced, not posed, just part of who she was. When she laughed at something on her phone, it was softer than the laugh she gave when other people were around. That laugh was fuller, almost performative, as though she wore it like a mask to keep the mood bright. But this quiet one, it was different. Quieter, warmer, meant only for herself. I realized I was staring too long when my friend nudged me with his elbow. "Your turn," he said, pointing at the controller. "Right. Sorry." I fumbled through the next round, but my focus was gone. Her presence lingered even when she wasn't in the room. Later, she stepped in to ask if we wanted something to drink. Her voice was casual, but when her eyes met mine, there was the faintest flicker of amusement. Maybe she'd caught me looking earlier, maybe she hadn't. "Yes, please," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She returned a moment later with 2 glasses of iced tea. When she handed me mine, her hand brushed my shoulder, light, brief, but enough to send a current through me. It shouldn't have meant anything. It was casual, friendly. But the warmth of her touch stayed long after she'd turned away. I tried to focus on the game again, but every time I lifted the glass to my lips, I thought about the fact that she'd placed it in my hands. That she'd looked at me, however briefly, with that unreadable expression. When my friend left the room for a moment to grab something upstairs, the house grew strangely still. I could hear the faint clink of dishes in the kitchen, the running water of the faucet. I found myself listening more closely than I should have, almost waiting for her to return. And when she did, wiping her hands on a dish towel, she glanced toward me and gave a small smile, the kind of smile that isn't offered to a room, only to one person. It was subtle. Maybe it meant nothing. But in that quiet exchange, something inside me shifted again. I looked down at the controller in my hands, pretending to be absorbed in the game, but all I could think about was her hand on my shoulder, the sound of her soft laughter, and how impossible it was becoming to ignore the details that made her feel more real, more human, than she ever had before. I wasn't sure if she noticed me noticing. But I had a feeling she did. And that realization made my pulse quicken in a way I couldn't explain. By the time the evening settled, the house had shifted into a softer rhythm. My friend had disappeared upstairs again, probably lost in another round of some game on his phone, and the television hummed faintly in the background. The rain outside tapped lightly against the windows, steady and calming. I found myself wandering toward the kitchen, drawn more by instinct than intention. The light was low there, golden against the dark outside. She stood at the counter, sleeves pushed up, rinsing glasses in the sink. A few strands of her hair had slipped loose, brushing against her cheek, and she absently tucked them back with a kind of grace that made the simplest gesture seem captivating. She noticed me leaning against the doorway. "You boys go through cups like you're running a cafe," she said with a smile, shaking her head. I grinned. "We get competitive. Hydration's important." She let out a soft laugh, not the polite kind, but the real kind I'd noticed earlier. It settled warmly between us. "Want me to help?" I asked, stepping closer. "You'll only make more of a mess," she teased, handing me a dish towel anyway. "Here. Dry." I took it, standing beside her. The sink gurgled softly, the scent of soap and citrus rising with the steam. Our elbows brushed as I reached for a glass. It was nothing, really, but the contact felt amplified by how close the space was, by how aware I'd become of her presence. For a few minutes, we worked quietly. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, layered with things neither of us said. "Do you ever get tired of all this?" I asked, surprising even myself. She glanced at me, curious. "Tired of what?" "Taking care of everything. Making it all look easy." Her hands slowed on the plate she was rinsing. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd crossed the line. But then she sighed softly, setting the dish aside. "Sometimes," she admitted. Her voice was quiet, thoughtful. "People think because I hold it together, it means I don't ever feel overwhelmed." She paused, eyes fixed on the running water. "But I do. I just don't let many people see it." I didn't know what to say at first. Hearing her speak that way, not confident, not composed, but human, vulnerable, it caught me off guard. "I see it," I said finally, my voice lower than I intended. She turned then, meeting my eyes. The moment stretched. Her gaze wasn't guarded now. It was open, searching, almost as though she wanted to believe I meant it. The hum of the faucet, the patter of rain outside, the soft glow of the lamp, everything else blurred until it felt like it was just us, standing too close in a kitchen that suddenly seemed much smaller. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but she didn't look away. "You're a surprising one," she murmured. My throat felt tight. "Is that good or bad?" She shut off the water, dried her hands slowly, deliberately. "I haven't decided yet." Her answer should have been playful. But the way she said it, steady and quiet, made it feel like it carried more weight than either of us was ready to admit. And for the rest of the night, I couldn't stop replaying that silence, that look, that brief glimpse of who she was beneath the surface. A couple of nights later, I found myself back at their house for a small get-together. Just a handful of people. My friend had invited a few classmates, the kind of casual gathering where laughter filled every corner of the living room and the music played just a little too loud. She was there too. Not hovering, not intruding, but present in that way only she could be, graceful, composed, yet unmistakably noticeable. She wore something simple, a soft blouse and dark jeans, but somehow she carried herself like the room belonged to her. And in a way it did. At first, I tried to focus on the group. I laughed at the jokes, joined in the stories, let myself get caught in the noise. But every so often, when the sound dipped, my eyes found her across the room. She wasn't vying for attention, she didn't need to. The curve of her smile, the quiet intelligence in her eyes, was enough to hold mine longer than it should have. When our glances met, it was like a silent exchange no one else noticed. The kind of look that lasted a fraction too long to be accidental. Later, while people were caught up in a game of cards at the dining table, I drifted toward where she stood by the kitchen counter, pouring another glass of wine. She didn't look up right away, but there was a faint smirk tugging at her lips as if she already knew I was there. "Having fun?" she asked lightly, setting the bottle down. "Trying to behave," I said, lowering my voice so only she could hear. That earned me the reaction I wanted, a glance, quick but sharp, followed by a smile she tried to hide behind the rim of her glass. "You don't make it easy," she murmured, more to herself than to me. I chuckled softly. "Neither do you." For a moment, it was just the two of us again, tucked into a quiet corner of a crowded house. I could hear the laughter behind us, the shuffle of cards, but all my focus narrowed to the way her hand rested lightly on the counter, fingers tracing absent circles against the wood. When she brushed past me a moment later to return to the table, her hand grazed my arm, the softest touch, fleeting, but deliberate enough to leave me wondering if she had meant it. I froze for half a second, caught between wanting to follow and knowing I couldn't. She slipped back into the group effortlessly, her smile easy, her voice warm as though nothing had happened. But I felt it. The heat of her touch lingered on my sleeve like a secret meant only for me. The rest of the night, I couldn't shake the thought. Our earlier banter, her hidden smile, the way she had brushed past me, these weren't accidents anymore. Something had shifted. And even as I sat back down with the others, laughing at jokes I barely heard, I knew she and I were standing at the thin, fragile line between playful teasing and something far more personal. By the time I came over again, the weather had turned heavy. The sky sagged low with gray clouds, and before long, rain came pouring down in sheets, rattling against the windows and drumming on the roof. My friend groaned dramatically, throwing his arms up. "Well, so much for going out tonight." We settled into the living room, the storm outside giving the night its own kind of energy. The rain's rhythm filled the spaces between our words, making everything feel closer, more contained. She suggested a board game, pulling one from the shelf with a playful determination that none of us dared argue with. "Come on," she said, spreading the pieces on the coffee table. "If you're all trapped here, you might as well be entertained." We laughed, gathered around, and soon the game began. The air felt warmer with everyone crammed close, shoulders brushing, laughter spilling as we argued over rules and strategies. But for me, there was only one nearness I couldn't ignore. She sat beside me, close enough that the sleeve of her sweater occasionally brushed my arm. The subtle contact was nothing anyone else would notice, but each time it happened, I felt it like a spark. When we both reached for the same game piece at once, our fingers collided. It should have been nothing. A quick apology, a laugh. And that's what it was, on the surface. But her hand lingered half a second longer than necessary, and when our eyes met, her smile was small and knowing. "Guess we're both competitive," I said softly. "Guess so," she replied, her tone light, but her gaze steady. The game carried on, but the moments stacked up like unspoken moves of their own, her knee brushing mine under the table, the way her hand hovered a fraction too close when she pointed at the board. Even in a room filled with laughter, the quiet current between us felt louder than the storm outside. When the game ended, my friend stretched out dramatically on the couch, claiming victory even though he hadn't won. She rolled her eyes, shaking her head, then leaned back in her seat with a sigh. The lamplight caught the curve of her cheek, the soft shadows across her face. She looked relaxed in a way I hadn't seen before, almost like she'd let the weight of the day fall away for just a little while. I caught myself staring again, my chest tight with the strange mix of warmth and restlessness that seemed to grow every time I was near her. It wasn't just attraction, though that was there, undeniable. It was the feeling that she carried layers no one else bothered to notice, and that somehow, without meaning to, she had started letting me see them. The storm outside roared on, but inside, time felt suspended, as though everything narrowed to the small, shared space between us, filled with laughter, subtle touches, and all the things we couldn't say out loud. And in that moment, I realized the danger wasn't in behaving badly. The danger was in how natural it had started to feel, being near her. Later that night, after the board games and laughter had faded, the house grew quiet. My friend had retreated upstairs, leaving behind the faint sound of music drifting from his room. I couldn't sleep yet, though. Something about the rain kept me restless. I found her on the porch. She was sitting in a wicker chair, legs tucked beneath her, wrapped in the faint glow of the porch light. The rain poured steadily beyond the roof's edge, a curtain of silver lines against the darkness. She didn't notice me right away. Her gaze was fixed outward, lost in the storm. I hesitated in the doorway, then stepped out, the boards creaking softly under my weight. "Couldn't sleep either?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. She glanced over, surprised but not displeased. A small smile touched her lips. "Something like that. The rain, it makes it hard to quiet my thoughts." I eased into the chair beside hers. The air was cool and damp, carrying the earthy scent of wet grass. For a while either of us spoke. The rain filled the silence, steady and calming, but beneath it I felt a different kind of quiet, one charged with everything we hadn't said. After a moment, she let out a soft breath. "You know, people always assume I've got everything figured out. That I'm steady, unshakable. But the truth is, some nights I feel just as unsure as anyone else." Her voice was softer now, almost fragile, and I turned to look at her. She wasn't playing a part. She wasn't the composed, witty woman I usually saw. She was just human. And somehow that honesty made her even more captivating. I didn't try to fill the space with empty reassurance. Instead, I let the weight of her words settle before I spoke. "I think, maybe the people who seem strongest are the ones carrying the most quietly." She met my eyes then, and something passed between us, not spoken, but understood. The breeze shifted, cooler now. Without thinking, I slipped off my jacket and draped it gently over her shoulders. My hand lingered as I adjusted the collar, brushing against the warmth of her neck. She looked at me, surprised at first, then softened. Her hand came up, fingers lightly brushing mine as if to say thank you, or maybe as if she didn't want me to pull away too quickly. The contact was small, simple, but it held more weight than anything we'd said all night. My chest tightened, not with nerves but with the overwhelming sense that we were standing at a threshold neither of us had expected to reach. We stayed like that, not speaking, just listening to the rain, our hands barely touching, her wrapped in my jacket. The silence wasn't awkward. It was thick with meaning, filled with the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. When she finally looked away, it wasn't to dismiss the moment, but to hold on to it quietly. "You're different than I thought you'd be," she murmured. I swallowed hard, my voice low. "Is that good or bad?" Her smile was faint, almost shy. "Good." The rain kept falling, steady and endless, but I barely heard it anymore. All I could feel was the warmth of her beside me, the weight of her honesty, and the quiet gravity of a moment I knew I would never forget. The morning came quietly, the storm long gone. The air smelled fresh, washed clean, and pale sunlight filtered through the curtains. I woke earlier than my friend, moving quietly down the stairs so as not to disturb anyone. The house was hushed, as if still drowsy from the night before. She was already awake. I found her in the kitchen, standing by the counter with a steaming cup of tea cradled between her hands. The light caught in her hair, softer now, and there was a calmness in her posture that hadn't been there last night. She looked peaceful, though her eyes flicked up at me with that same spark I'd grown so attuned to. "Morning," I said quietly. "Morning," she replied, her voice low, almost gentle. For a moment, it felt like we were the only two awake in the world. The kind of stillness you don't want to disturb. I grabbed a glass of water, sipping slowly, searching for words that didn't come easily. I thought about the rain, about the jacket still resting somewhere near the porch, about her hand brushing mine and the silence we had shared. None of it could be undone, and yet it all remained unspoken. She broke the quiet first. "You'll be heading out soon?" "Yeah," I said, setting the glass down. "My friend will probably sleep till noon if I let him, but I should get going." She nodded, but there was something in the way she looked at me, a softness, maybe even a reluctance, as though she didn't want the moment to slip away too quickly. I stepped toward the door, pulling on my shoes. She followed, almost out of habit, like it was her role to see guests out. But the air between us carried something new now, something fragile and precious. At the doorway, I turned to face her. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" Her head tilted slightly. "For last night," I answered. "For trusting me with that." Her expression shifted, the faintest trace of vulnerability crossing her features. She didn't answer right away, but instead reached for my hand. The touch was light, her fingers slipping gently around mine, a quiet squeeze that lasted only a heartbeat, yet it carried more meaning than words ever could. When she let go, it was with the same quiet grace she always carried. But the look in her eyes told me she hadn't wanted to. I hesitated at the threshold, memorizing the way she stood there in the morning light, composed, beautiful, and yet, beneath it all, quietly human in a way I felt honored to have witnessed. My friend's voice called faintly from upstairs, half awake, oblivious. The spell of the moment broke, but not completely. She smiled, soft and knowing. "Behave yourself," she said, the same playful words she'd greeted me with days ago. But now, they carried a weight, a secret history only the two of us would ever understand. I couldn't help the smile that spread across my face. "Only if you do first." Her laugh was quiet, warm, almost whispered, a farewell and a promise all at once. And as I stepped out into the cool morning air, I knew I wasn't carrying scandal or regret with me. I was carrying the quiet warmth of a bond that would linger far beyond that doorway. 27.